The garage door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold Connecticut air that made me pull my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. I fumbled for the light switch, illuminating my bedroom, a fold-out cot wedged between cardboard boxes and rusty garden tools. This was my reward for giving my daughter everything I had built. The worst part, the beautiful home I had constructed with my own hands, stood just 50 feet away. Warm lights glowed from every window as my son-in-law's laughter drifted through the night. I was Eleanor Wilson, 68 years old, and I was sleeping in my own garage while the man who promised to care for my daughter was throwing another dinner party without me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You're welcome to join us, Mom, Jessica had said earlier, not meeting my eyes. But Andrew thinks it might be awkward since, well, you know how his colleagues are. What I knew was that Andrew Reynolds thought I wasn't good enough for his precious image. What he didn't know was who I really was, or who I was about to call. I never planned to live with my daughter and son-in-law. After Thomas died 5 years ago, I was perfectly content in our family home, a spacious colonial in Maplewood that my late husband and I had built ourselves back when Wilson Construction was just getting off the ground. I designed every inch of that house, from the ornate crown molding to the hidden reading nook under the stairs. It wasn't just a house, it was the physical embodiment of 40 years of love and hard work. Jessica was our only child. Perhaps we spoiled her, especially Thomas. Whatever our daughter wanted, she got: dance lessons, private school, European vacations. When she met Andrew Reynolds during her final year of college, I had my reservations. There was something calculated about his charm, something too perfect about the way he spoke about the future. Thomas, ever the optimist, told me I was being overprotective. "He comes from a good family, Ellie," Thomas would say. "His father's company is reputable. Jessica could do worse." I didn't argue. What? Mother wants to admit she doesn't trust her daughter's judgment? Besides, Jessica was radiant around Andrew. He was handsome in that conventional way, dark hair always neatly combed, tailored suits that screamed old money, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. But Jessica didn't notice that last part. She saw the man who brought her flowers and promised her the world. When Thomas was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer, everything changed. The man who had built houses for half the families in Maplewood deteriorated before my eyes. During those final months, all he talked about was making sure Jessica would be taken care of. "Promise me you'll look after our girl," he'd whispered, his once strong hand gripping mine with surprising force. "Make sure she has everything she needs." I promised. How could I not? 3 months after the funeral, Andrew proposed to Jessica. The wedding was elaborate, much more extravagant than Thomas and I had ever envisioned for our daughter. Andrew's parents, Robert and Patricia Reynolds, made it clear from the beginning that they expected a certain standard. Patricia's comments still echo in my mind. "We should really host the reception at the country club," she'd said, eyeing my home with barely concealed disdain. "The Wilson house is charming, but hardly suitable for the guest list." I bit my tongue. This was Jessica's day, not mine. I wanted her to be happy. After the honeymoon, Andrew started dropping hints about their living situation. The newlyweds were staying in a luxury apartment downtown, paid for by Andrew's parents. "Jessica really misses Maplewood," he mentioned during Sunday dinner. "She talks about raising children in the house where she grew up. It would mean so much to her." I should have seen it for what it was: manipulation. But grief had softened my edges. All I could think about was Thomas's last wish: make sure Jessica has everything she needs. So I did what any mother might do. I signed over the deed to our family home to Jessica with the understanding that I would live in the guest suite we had built for my mother years before. The joy on Jessica's face when I handed her the papers made it all worthwhile, or so I thought. The first few months were pleasant enough. I kept to myself, gave the young couple their space, and found comfort in knowing Jessica was building her life in the home where she'd grown up. I spent my days volunteering at the community center and meeting my old friend Martha for coffee. Martha had warned me early on. "Ellie, you're being too generous. she'd said over steaming mugs at Green Street Cafe. You should have kept some control over the property. I'd laughed it off. Andrew's a financial advisor, Martha. He knows how to manage assets better than I do. Besides, it's Jessica's inheritance. I'm just giving it to her early. What I didn't tell Martha or anyone was that the house wasn't my only asset. Thomas and I had built more than just a construction company. We'd invested wisely over decades, diversifying into real estate and other ventures. There was the cabin in Vermont that no one knew about, purchased through one of our business entities. There were offshore accounts and silent partnerships with developers across the state. Thomas had been a builder, but I had been the business mind behind Wilson Construction. After his death, I had quietly sold the company for a sum that would have made Andrew's eyes bulge had he known. But I kept these details to myself. A smart woman always has a backup plan, Thomas used to say with a wink. It was one of the many things we had agreed on in our 40-year marriage. The dynamics in the house changed gradually. First, it was small things. Andrew reorganized the kitchen, moving my special occasion dishes to a high shelf I couldn't reach without a step stool. Then, Jessica mentioned that perhaps I shouldn't use the main entrance when they had company. It's just that Andrew's colleagues are important for his career advancement, she explained, not meeting my eyes. He needs to project a certain image. I wondered when I had become incompatible with my daughter's image of success. I'd run a multi-million-dollar construction company for decades. I'd negotiated contracts with some of the most powerful developers in the Northeast. Yet somehow, I wasn't sophisticated enough for Andrew's financial advisor friends. Then came the remodeling. Without consulting me, Andrew hired contractors to renovate the master suite, the bedroom Thomas and I had shared for decades. I came home from a volunteer shift to find strangers tearing out the custom cabinetry Thomas had built with his own hands. We're updating the house to better reflect their lifestyle, the project manager explained when I confronted him, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Reynolds was very specific about the changes. That night, I found Jessica alone in the kitchen and asked her about the renovation. "Oh, Mom," she sighed. "Andrew wanted to surprise me. Isn't it thoughtful? He says the house needs a modern touch, Jessica. Those cabinets were handcrafted by your father. They were solid oak." She had the decency to look embarrassed. "I know, but Andrew says they made the room look dated. His clients expect a certain standard when they visit." "His clients visit your bedroom?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "It's not like that. We're hosting a housewarming next month and people will want a tour of the whole place. It needs to look cohesive." "Cohesive," I repeated. It was the first time I felt like a stranger in my own home. The renovations expanded. The reading nook Thomas had built for Jessica when she was 7? Gone. The hand-painted tiles in the guest bathroom replaced with cold modern marble. With each change, a piece of Thomas vanished, and with it, a piece of me. I started spending more time with Martha, who was sympathetic but increasingly concerned. "Ellie, this isn't right," she said one afternoon as we watched children play in the park. "That's your home. You built it." "It's Jessica's home now," I replied, though the words tasted bitter. "I gave it to her." Martha shook her head. "There's a difference between giving someone a gift and letting them erase you." I knew she was right, but what could I do? I'd signed away my rights to the property. Besides, confronting Andrew directly would only strain my relationship with Jessica further. The final straw came 6 months after I'd signed over the deed. I returned from a weekend visit with my sister to find my belongings had been moved from the guest suite to the detached garage at the back of the property. The garage had been hastily converted, with a cot, a space heater, a small dresser, and a bathroom consisting of a toilet and sink wedged into the former tool room. Jessica met me in the driveway, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "Andrew's parents are coming to stay for a month," she explained. "They need the guest suite." "A month?" I echoed, staring at the garage. "And you expect me to sleep out here?" "Jessica, it's November. Connecticut winters aren't exactly garage-friendly." "It's insulated," she insisted, though we both knew it wasn't properly insulated for living. "And there's the space heater. It's only temporary." "Mom, where was I supposed to sleep during this family discussion?" Jessica had the grace to look away. Andrew thought it would be easier to present you with the solution rather than cause you stress about the planning. How considerate of him, I said flatly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That night, lying on the squeaky cot with the distant sounds of my daughter's life continuing without me, I stared at the ceiling and finally admitted the truth. Jessica wasn't going to stand up for me. Whatever influence Andrew had over her was stronger than her connection to me. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt truly alone. The temporary arrangement stretched into weeks, then months. Robert and Patricia Reynolds extended their stay, then left, only to be replaced by a series of house guests. Andrew's colleagues, his college friends, even his personal trainer, who needed a place to stay between leases. Each time, Jessica assured me it would just be a little longer. Winter set in with a vengeance. The space heater struggled against the cold that seeped through the garage's thin walls. I developed a persistent cough that concerned Martha enough that she insisted on taking me to her doctor. Prolonged exposure to cold, possibly some mold in those garage walls. Dr. Chen diagnosed me, prescribing an inhaler and antibiotics. Mrs. Wilson, this is not a suitable living arrangement for someone your age, especially in winter. Martha drove me back to the house, my house, seething with righteous anger. This ends today, she declared, parking directly behind Andrew's BMW. In the driveway, I'm going to give that entitled young man a piece of my mind. I placed a restraining hand on her arm. No, Martha, this is between me and my family. What family? She snapped. A daughter who lets her mother sleep in a garage? A son-in-law who treats you like an inconvenience? That's not family, Ellie. That's emotional abuse. The word abuse hung in the air. I'd never considered it that way. I was Eleanor Wilson, former CEO of Wilson Construction. I'd negotiated million-dollar deals across boardroom tables. How had I allowed myself to be relegated to a garage by my own daughter? That evening, I knocked on the main house door, my own front door, and waited like a visitor until Jessica answered. "Mom, we're in the middle of dinner," she said, keeping the door half closed. Through the gap, I could see Andrew and another couple seated at my dining room table, the cherrywood table Thomas had commissioned for our 25th anniversary. "I need to speak with you, both of you," I added, making sure my voice carried to Andrew. Jessica glanced back nervously. "Can it wait? Andrew's hosting his new clients." "No, it can't wait. I've been diagnosed with a respiratory infection from living in that unheated garage. My doctor says I can't stay there anymore." Andrew appeared behind Jessica, his perfect smile fixed in place. "Eleanor, we have guests. Surely this can wait until morning. Jessica will bring you some extra blankets." I looked past him to the couple at the table who were watching with undisguised curiosity. "Hello," I called out. "I'm Eleanor Wilson. This was my home before I gave it to my daughter. Now I sleep in the garage while my son-in-law entertains in the house my husband built. How are you enjoying your dinner?" The woman's eyes widened and she whispered something to her husband. Andrew's smile faltered for the first time. "Eleanor, that's enough," he hissed, moving to block my view. "You're embarrassing, Jessica." I turned to my daughter, searching for any sign of the young woman who had once adored her father and me. "Am I embarrassing you, Jessica, or is it embarrassing that your mother has pneumonia from sleeping in a garage while you host dinner parties?" Her face crumpled. For a moment, I thought I'd broken through whatever spell Andrew had cast over her. Then she straightened, her expression hardening in a way that reminded me painfully of Patricia Reynolds. "You're being dramatic, Mom. It's not pneumonia, and the garage is perfectly adequate. If you're unhappy with the arrangement, perhaps you should consider other options." The words hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter was suggesting I move out completely. "I see," I said quietly. "I believe I will consider other options." I turned and walked back to the garage, my heart breaking with each step. Behind me, I heard Andrew smooth things over with his guests, his voice carrying across the yard. "My mother-in-law is going through a difficult adjustment period. You know how it is with the elderly. They struggle with change." I was 68, hardly elderly. I had run a company until 3 years ago. I'd raised capital, managed teams, and built a legacy that had provided the very roof over Andrew's ungrateful head. Inside the garage, I sat on the edge of the cot and made a decision. I tried to honor Thomas's wish by giving Jessica everything, but my late husband would never have wanted this. His wife exiled to a garage, his memory erased from the home he built, his daughter transformed into someone who could treat her mother with such casual cruelty. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years. George Thompson had been Thomas's business partner and my friend for decades. He'd retired to Florida shortly after Thomas's death, but we still exchanged holiday cards. More importantly, George was the only other person who knew about all of Wilson Construction's assets, including the ones that weren't in the official records. My finger hovered over his name. If I made this call, there would be no going back. The quiet, compliant mother, who accepted whatever scraps of dignity her daughter and son-in-law threw her way, would be gone forever. Outside, I could hear laughter from the house as Andrew entertained his guests, probably pouring wine into the crystal glasses Thomas and I had received as wedding gifts. My gaze drifted to the photo on my makeshift nightstand. Thomas holding newborn Jessica, his face alight with pride and love. I tried. "Tom," I whispered to his image, "but I think it's time for Plan B." I pressed the call button. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Eleanor Wilson, it's been too long. How are you, my dear?" I took a deep breath. "George, I need your help. It's time to execute the contingency plan." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "I was wondering when you'd call. Thomas always said you'd wait too long. What did that son-in-law of yours do?" As I explained the situation, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. By the time I hung up, the path forward was clear. Eleanor Wilson was done sleeping in garages. It was time to remind everyone exactly who I was and what happened to people who underestimated me. George arrived in Maplewood 3 days later. I met him at the Green Street Cafe, away from Jessica and Andrew's prying eyes. Despite being in his 70s, George Thompson hadn't changed much. Still tall and imposing, with a shock of white hair and those keen blue eyes that could see through any deception. He embraced me warmly before holding me at arm's length, his expression darkening as he took in my appearance. "Good Lord, Eleanor," he muttered. "You've lost 20 pounds since I last saw you, and that cough doesn't sound good." I waved away his concern as we settled into a corner booth. "Garage living isn't exactly spa treatment, George, but I'll be fine." "You shouldn't have been living in a garage to begin with," he replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Thomas would be turning in his grave if he knew." The waitress brought us coffee, and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, savoring the heat. The cafe was quiet at this hour, just a few retirees reading newspapers and a young mother trying to keep her toddler entertained. "I have the documents you asked for," George said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table. "Everything's in order. Property deeds, account statements, the incorporation papers for Horizon Holdings." Horizon Holdings had been Thomas's and my secret contingency plan. We'd created the LLC years ago, gradually transferring properties and investments into its name. On paper, Horizon was owned by a series of shell companies that eventually traced back to a trust we'd established. Neither Jessica nor Andrew had any idea it existed. "What about the cabin?" I asked. George smiled. "Still there, still beautiful, and legally owned by Horizon Holdings. I had a property manager check on it last month. Everything's ready for you whenever you want to use it." I took a deep breath, feeling something close to hope for the first time in months. "And the liquid assets?" "Approximately $42 million in accounts that only you can access. Thomas made sure of that." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Ellie, why did you wait so long to call me? You've been living like a pauper when you're worth millions." The question caught in my throat. Why had I subjected myself to this pride, stubbornness, and love for my daughter? "I wanted to give Jessica a chance," I finally admitted. "I thought if I was patient enough, understanding enough, she'd remember who she was, who we were as a family. I didn't want to believe she'd choose Andrew over me." George's weathered hand covered mine. Your daughter made her choice, Ellie. Now it's time to make yours. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing my options. The deed to the house was in Jessica's name. There was no changing that, but everything else, all the assets Andrew had no idea existed, those were still mine to control. The first order of business, George said, is getting you out of that garage. You're coming back to my hotel with me today, and tomorrow we'll find you a proper place to live. I shook my head. Not yet. If I leave now, Andrew wins. He wants me gone, out of sight, where he doesn't have to acknowledge my existence. I need to be strategic about this. George raised an eyebrow. You have something in mind? I do. I took a sip of coffee, organizing my thoughts. Andrew's entire persona is built on the illusion of success. His family has old money, but from what I've gathered, Robert Reynolds' company has been struggling for years. Andrew needs to maintain the appearance of wealth and influence to attract clients. And you want to disrupt that illusion? Precisely. But first, I need information. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name. I've been doing some digging. Andrew's firm, Reynolds Financial Services, isn't as stable as he pretends. They've lost several major clients recently. I need to know why. You suspect something unethical? I suspect Andrew inherited his father's talent for cutting corners. Thomas always said Robert Reynolds would charm you with one hand while picking your pocket with the other. George leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. You haven't changed a bit, Ellie. Still the strategist. I learned from the best, I replied, thinking of Thomas and our late-night planning sessions at the kitchen table, mapping out the future of Wilson Construction, deal by deal. We parted with a plan in place. George would stay in Maplewood for a week, using his old business contacts to quietly investigate Reynolds Financial Services. Meanwhile, I would continue my garage exile, playing the role of the defeated mother-in-law while gathering information from inside the house. That evening, I returned to find Andrew's BMW gone and Jessica alone in the kitchen. She looked up as I entered, her expression guarded. Mom, about last night. It's all right, I interrupted, keeping my voice mild. I understand you were put in a difficult position. Relief washed over her face, quickly followed by guilt. The garage really isn't suitable. I've been talking to Andrew about converting the basement space into an apartment for you. It would be warmer at least. That's thoughtful. I coughed deliberately, reminding her of my condition. Though Dr. Chen did say I need to avoid damp spaces because of my lungs. Jessica bit her lip. The basement is dry. Dad made sure of that when he built the house. Her voice softened at the mention of Thomas. Remember how he insisted on that French drainage system everyone thought was overkill? I remember. I took a seat at the kitchen island, watching my daughter move around the space Thomas and I had designed together. Your father was always thinking ahead, planning for every contingency. He was amazing that way. A genuine smile flickered across her face, and for a moment I saw my Jessica again, not the woman Andrew had molded her into. Have you heard from Andrew's parents lately? I asked, keeping my tone conversational. Jessica tensed slightly. They're in Palm Beach for the winter. Why? Just curious. Robert mentioned some changes at the firm when they were staying here. I wondered how that was going. What changes? Her voice sharpened. I shrugged. Something about restructuring. I'm sure it's nothing important. Jessica turned away, busying herself with wiping down the countertop. Andrew doesn't really discuss business with me. Interesting. In all our family dinners before the wedding, Andrew had boasted about how he involved Jessica in every aspect of his life, including his financial practice. Partners in everything, he declared, raising a toast. Apparently that partnership had limits. Of course, I said. It was probably just small talk. I stood, making a show of steadying myself against the counter. I should get back to the garage. I'm feeling a bit tired. Jessica's eyes flickered with worry. Mom, are you okay? You look pale. Just the infection. Dr. Chen says it'll take time to clear up. Maybe we should look into assisted living options, she suggested tentatively. Somewhere with proper medical supervision. I almost laughed. Assisted living at 68 with my faculties intact and my bank accounts healthy, but I kept my expression neutral. Perhaps, though, those places are expensive. Andrew knows someone who runs a very nice facility in Glastonbury. Nothing too extravagant, but clean and well managed. In other words, cheap. I nodded thoughtfully. I'll consider it, though I'm not sure what I'd use for payment. The house was my main asset, and my Social Security barely covers my medications. It was a blatant lie. Thomas and I had excellent insurance and substantial savings outside of the house, but Jessica didn't need to know that, not yet. We could help, she offered, though her tone lacked conviction. Andrew and I, that's very generous, but you two are just starting out. I wouldn't want to be a burden. I headed toward the door, then paused. Jessica, are you happy? The question caught her off guard. Of course I am. Why would you ask that? You just seem different lately. Less like yourself, and more like what? Her defenses were rising. Like Patricia, I said simply. The color drained from her face. If there was one person Jessica had always sworn she'd never emulate, it was her mother-in-law. Patricia Reynolds' cold perfectionism and materialistic values had been sources of many eye rolls and complaints during Jessica's engagement. That's ridiculous, she said. I'm nothing like her. I hope not. I opened the door because Patricia would ship her mother off to a cut-rate nursing home without a second thought. I've always believed you had more of your father in you than that. I left her standing in the kitchen, her mouth slightly open. It was a calculated risk, pushing her that way, but I needed to plant seeds of doubt. The Jessica I'd raised was still in there somewhere beneath layers of Andrew's influence. Back in the garage, I reviewed the documents George had brought. The cabin in Vermont was ready whenever I needed it. Beautiful 3-bedroom property on 5 acres purchased through Horizon Holdings 10 years ago when Thomas and I were planning our retirement. We'd kept it off the family radar, our private escape. There were also statements from accounts in 3 different banks, all healthy and untouched since Thomas's death. The incorporation papers for Horizon showed that I was the sole managing member with full authority to act on the company's behalf. Most interesting was a folder labeled Reynolds Financial Preliminary. George had already begun his investigation, pulling public records and news stories about Robert Reynolds' firm. Nothing incriminating yet, but there were patterns. Complaints withdrawn suddenly, settlements with confidentiality clauses, former employees who refused to provide references. My phone buzzed with a text from George. Dinner tomorrow? Found something interesting. I replied with a simple yes, then settled onto my cot, mind racing with possibilities. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with tackling a complex problem. Andrew Reynolds had no idea what was coming. The next evening, I told Jessica I was having dinner with Martha, then met George at an upscale restaurant in the next town over. He was already seated when I arrived, nursing a scotch and looking pleased with himself. "You're going to enjoy this," he said as I took my seat. I made contact with a former employee of Reynolds Financial, a junior advisor named Olivia Chen. She left the firm about 8 months ago under mysterious circumstances, and she was willing to talk. Not at first, but when I mentioned I was representing a potential investor concerned about ethics, she agreed to meet. George slid his phone across the table, displaying a photo of a professional-looking Asian woman in her mid-40s. "She's smart, Ellie. Top of her class at Wharton. Impeccable credentials. Reynolds recruited her heavily, then sidelined her when she started asking questions." "Questions about what?" I asked. "Client accounts, specifically discrepancies in reported returns versus actual performance. She suspected someone was manipulating the numbers to keep clients happy while skimming from the accounts." My blood ran cold. Securities fraud, potentially. She couldn't prove anything. Reynolds keeps their systems locked down tight, but she saw enough to make her uncomfortable. When she raised concerns to Robert, he dismissed her. When she went to Andrew, he had her terminated the next day. "Did she report it?" I asked. "She filed a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission, but without solid evidence, they couldn't pursue it. She's been blacklisted from most firms in the area. Reynolds made sure of that. She's working as a financial consultant for small businesses now, barely making ends meet. I digested this information. Would she be willing to meet with me? She's cautious, but yes. I told her you might have resources that could help her case. She's meeting us for coffee tomorrow. We ordered dinner, and I filled George in on my conversation with Jessica. He nodded approvingly. You're driving a wedge between her and Andrew. Good strategy. I'm trying to remind her of who she was before him, I corrected. My daughter was never cruel or materialistic. This version of Jessica is Andrew's creation. Or perhaps it's who she always was, and you just didn't want to see it, George said gently, but his words stung. You didn't know her growing up. She was kind, George, thoughtful. Thomas and I raised her to value people over things. People change, Ellie, sometimes for the worse. I pushed my food around my plate, appetite gone. Not Jessica, not completely. I refused to believe that. George didn't argue, but his silence spoke volumes. We moved on to practical matters. Finding me a place to live, accessing the funds I'd need to execute my plan, establishing a timeline for action. The most important thing, he emphasized, is maintaining the element of surprise. The moment Andrew realizes you have resources he doesn't know about, he'll start counter moves. He won't find out until I'm ready, I assured him. Right now, he sees me as a helpless old woman he can bully into leaving. That perception is my greatest advantage. After dinner, George drove me back to the house, stopping a block away at my request. Are you sure you don't want to come to the hotel? I have a suite with an extra bedroom. You'd be comfortable there. Not yet, I said. I need to be here a little longer. Trust me, George, he sighed. I do trust you. It's that son-in-law of yours I'm worried about. Men like Andrew are dangerous when cornered. I'll be careful, I promised, then made my way back to the garage in the darkness. The next morning, I found a note taped to the garage door. Jessica's handwriting. Mom, going to look at that facility in Glastonbury with Andrew. Back by dinner. There's soup in the fridge if you're hungry. Jay, so they were already shopping for nursing homes, moving faster than I'd anticipated. I needed to accelerate my own plans. I spent the morning on my laptop researching Connecticut's financial regulations and documentation requirements for investment advisors. By noon, I had a solid understanding of where Reynolds Financial might be vulnerable if they were indeed manipulating client accounts. At 1, I met George and Olivia Chen at a quiet cafe in Hartford. Olivia was exactly as her photo suggested, a polished professional with an intensity in her dark eyes that spoke of determination. Mrs. Wilson, she greeted me. George explained your situation. I'm sorry about your daughter and son-in-law. Please call me Eleanor, and I appreciate your willingness to meet with us. We settled into a booth at the back of the cafe, and Olivia got straight to the point. I need to be clear. I have suspicions, but no concrete proof of wrongdoing at Reynolds Financial. Everything I saw could potentially be explained as administrative errors or aggressive but legal investment strategies. But you don't believe that's the case? I prompted. No, I don't. The patterns were too consistent. Large accounts showing artificially inflated returns on paper, while the actual holdings didn't match the reporting, clients being shifted between advisors whenever they started asking detailed questions, and there was a separate password-protected client list that only Robert and Andrew could access. George leaned forward. VIP clients. Olivia nodded. That's what they called them. But these weren't necessarily the wealthiest clients or the oldest accounts. Some were relatively new with modest portfolios. The common denominator seemed to be that they rarely checked their statements in detail. Elderly clients, I suggested. People who trusted their advisor implicitly. Exactly. Many were retirees who had handed over their life savings to Reynolds. Several were widows. Her eyes met mine. Women who had recently lost their husbands and had limited financial experience. My stomach tightened. It was a predatory pattern targeting the vulnerable. If Andrew had looked at me as a potential mark before learning I'd signed over the house to Jessica, the thought made me ill. What exactly are you hoping to find, Eleanor? Olivia asked. Leverage, I answered honestly. My son-in-law is trying to force me out of my daughter's life. If he's engaged in financial misconduct, I want to know about it. She studied me. To report him if necessary. My preference would be to convince him to back off without involving the authorities. I don't want to see my daughter hurt by a public scandal. Olivia considered this. I understand your position, but these aren't just numbers on a page. These are real people's life savings. If Reynolds Financial is defrauding clients, they deserve to be stopped. And they will be, I assured her. One way or another, but I need evidence first. Could you identify which clients might have been victimized? She hesitated. I don't have access to their systems anymore, and even when I worked there, the VIP list was restricted. But you remember some names? A few. There was one woman I was particularly concerned about, Margaret Winters. She invested her entire inheritance with Reynolds about 2 years ago, roughly $1.2 million. Her quarterly statements showed consistent 8 to 10% returns, which is unusually high for the conservative portfolio she requested. But when I accidentally accessed her actual holdings during a system glitch, the numbers didn't add up. I took out a notebook and wrote down the name. Anyone else? Olivia provided 3 more names along with what she could remember about their accounts. It wasn't much, but it was a start. There's something else, she added. There was an internal audit scheduled about a month before I left. Standard procedure, usually routine, but Andrew and Robert were unusually tense. They had us working late for weeks, cleaning up the files, as they called it. After hours, when they thought everyone had gone home, I saw them in Robert's office with stacks of documents. They were shredding things. George and I exchanged glances. Document destruction ahead of an audit was a major red flag. Do you know which firm conducted the audit? I asked. Peyton Associates. They've been Reynolds auditors for years. I always thought it was odd. Most firms rotate auditors regularly to ensure objectivity. Another note from my book. Olivia, would you be willing to go on record with this information if it became necessary? She took a deep breath. If you find actual evidence of fraud, yes, but not based on suspicions alone. I've already been blacklisted in this industry. I can't afford to be labeled a whistleblower without proof. Fair enough, I agreed. For now, let's keep this conversation between us, but I may need to contact you again as this develops. After Olivia left, George and I remained at the table, processing what we'd learned. It's circumstantial, he acknowledged, but compelling. If Andrew and his father are running a Ponzi scheme or skimming from accounts, they've put themselves in a vulnerable position and they've hurt people in the process, I added, thinking of Margaret Winters and the other names on my list. I need to see those client files. Breaking into Reynolds Financial isn't an option, Ellie. No, but approaching these clients might be. If they're willing to share their statements and account details, we might spot the discrepancies Olivia mentioned. It's risky. If Andrew finds out you're questioning his clients, he won't. I checked my watch. I should get back before Jessica and Andrew return from their nursing home tour. George insisted on driving me, still uncomfortable with my garage accommodations. As we pulled up a block from the house, he handed me a key card. Room 412 at the Maplewood Inn. It's reserved in my name for the next month. Use it whenever you need a break from that garage. I slipped the card into my pocket. Thank you, George, for everything. Thomas would be proud of you, Ellie. Standing your ground, protecting what matters. I smiled, though tears pricked at my eyes. What matters is setting things right. Not just for me, but for Jessica, too. She deserves better than a husband who preys on the vulnerable. And if she doesn't see it that way, if she chooses him despite knowing the truth, it was the question I'd been avoiding. Then at least I'll have tried. I owe Thomas that much. I walked back to the garage, my mind racing with plans. If Andrew Reynolds was engaged in financial fraud, I needed proof, not just to protect myself, but to save my daughter from a man who would sacrifice her future for his own gain. And perhaps in the process, I might be able to help Margaret Winters and others like her recover what was rightfully theirs. As I approached the property, I noticed Andrew's car was already in the driveway. They'd returned earlier than expected. Through the kitchen window, I could see Jessica and Andrew in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Jessica's arms were crossed defensively while Andrew loomed over her, his face tight with anger. I slowed my pace, watching. Whatever they were arguing about, it was serious. Jessica shook her head emphatically, then turned away. Andrew grabbed her arm, spinning her back to face him. Even from this distance, I could see the flash of fear across my daughter's face. My blood ran cold. In that moment, the pieces clicked into place. Jessica's increasing isolation, her subtle flinches when Andrew moved too quickly, the careful way she monitored his moods. This wasn't just about control or money. My daughter was afraid of her husband. I'd been approaching this as a battle of wits, a strategic game to outmaneuver Andrew. But now I understood the stakes were far higher than I'd realized. This wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity or exposing financial misconduct. It was about saving my daughter from a man who might be dangerous. I retreated to the shadows of the garden shed, pulling out my phone to text George. "Need to move faster. Jessica may be in danger." His reply came seconds later. "Coming back. Be there in 20. Don't confront him." I tucked the phone away, my heart pounding. 20 minutes felt like an eternity with my daughter inside that house. Through the window, I could see Andrew gesturing angrily, his face contorted. Jessica had backed against the counter, making herself smaller. I had no proof he'd ever physically hurt her, but emotional abuse was often the precursor to violence. I couldn't wait for George. I needed to interrupt whatever was happening in that kitchen. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and walked purposefully toward the back door. Eleanor Wilson had spent enough time hiding in garages. It was time to step back into the light and into the fight for my daughter's future. I rapped sharply on the back door, not waiting for an invitation before turning the handle. The argument inside stopped abruptly as I stepped into the kitchen. Andrew's expression shifted instantly, the rage dissolving into his practiced charm with disturbing ease. "Eleanor," he said smoothly, "we were just discussing the Glastonbury facility. It's really quite lovely. Private rooms, daily activities, medical staff on call. I think you'd be comfortable there." Jessica wiped hastily at her eyes, forcing a smile that didn't reach them. "Mom, I thought you were out with Martha today." "Plans changed," I replied, looking directly at Andrew. "Is everything all right?" I could hear raised voices from the driveway. "Just a small disagreement about finances," Andrew said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Really?" Because it looked rather intense from where I was standing. Andrew's smile tightened. "Were you spying on us, Eleanor?" "Observing," I corrected. "There's a difference, just as there's a difference between a disagreement and whatever I just witnessed." Jessica stepped between us, her hands fluttering nervously. "It's nothing, Mom." "Really? Andrew's just stressed about work. The audit is coming up." "And Jessica," Andrew's voice held a warning, "your mother doesn't need to hear about our business matters." An audit, just like Olivia had mentioned. The timing couldn't be coincidental. "Actually," I said, moving to the refrigerator as if I were simply looking for something to eat, "I'd be happy to help if you're preparing for an audit. I managed Wilson Construction's books for 30 years. Numbers are kind of my specialty." Andrew laughed, the sound hollow and condescending. "That's very kind, Eleanor, but Reynolds Financial is several magnitudes more complex than a local construction company. We have certified accountants for that sort of thing." I pulled out the container of soup Jessica had mentioned in her note, keeping my expression neutral despite the insult. "Of course, just offering, though Thomas and I did manage a multi-million-dollar business with operations across 3 states. Not quite as provincial as you might think." Jessica glanced at Andrew, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Dad's company was really successful, Andrew. They built half the commercial properties in the county." "And yet they sold it off rather than expanding," he replied. "A lack of vision, perhaps." If only he knew. Thomas and I had sold the company at its peak value, anticipating the construction slowdown that hit 6 months later. Our timing had been impeccable, maximizing our profit while our competitors struggled, but Andrew didn't need to know that. "Different priorities," I said mildly. Thomas valued family over empire building. Andrew checked his watch with exaggerated impatience. "Speaking of priorities, I have calls to make. Jessica, we'll continue our discussion later." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Jessica's shoulders tensed as Andrew left the room. When the door to his home office closed, she exhaled shakily. "Mom, you shouldn't antagonize him. He's under a lot of pressure right now." I heated the soup in the microwave, choosing my words carefully. "What kind of pressure exactly?" Jessica busied herself wiping down the already spotless counter. "Just work stuff. The markets have been volatile. Clients are nervous. You know how it is." "Is that why you were arguing about client concerns?" Her hand stilled. "Not exactly." "Then what exactly?" She looked toward Andrew's office, lowering her voice. "He wants to use the house as collateral for a business loan. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that. The house, my house, the home Thomas had built with his own hands that I had signed over to Jessica with the understanding it would be her security, her legacy. Now Andrew wanted to gamble it on whatever financial hole he was trying to fill. "Why does he need a loan?" I asked, keeping my voice even despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "It's a short-term cash flow issue. He says it's normal in the financial industry. Sometimes you need to cover client withdrawals while waiting for other investments to mature." She hesitated. "But it's a lot of money, Mom, and the house would be the only collateral." Red flags were waving frantically in my mind. This wasn't normal industry practice. It was classic Ponzi scheme behavior, using new money to pay existing investors while trying to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. "How much money are we talking about?" Jessica bit her lip. $2 million. I nearly dropped my soup bowl. $2 million. "Jessica, that's not a cash flow issue. That's a catastrophe. What happens if the loan isn't repaid? You'd lose the house. Andrew says it's perfectly safe. The investments will mature next quarter and everything will balance out. It's just temporary." I set down my spoon, choosing my next words with extreme care. "Have you seen documentation of these investments? Confirmation that they actually exist and will mature as he claims?" "Of course they exist," she snapped, her defensiveness rising. "Andrew wouldn't lie about something like that." "I'm not suggesting he would," I lied. "But it's a significant risk. Before you put your home on the line, you should at least verify the details. It's basic due diligence." Jessica's expression wavered between uncertainty and loyalty to her husband. "Andrew handles all the financial matters. He knows what he's doing." "Then he shouldn't have any problem showing you the paperwork," I pointed out. "Just ask him for the specifics. Which investments are maturing, when exactly, and for how much. If everything's legitimate, he'll have that information readily available." The kitchen door swung open, and Andrew reappeared, his smile tight as he assessed the scene. "Everything okay in here?" Jessica straightened, her moment of doubt carefully concealed. "Fine. Mom was just having some soup." "Wonderful." Andrew's gaze flicked to me, then back to Jessica. "I've just spoken with the director at Whispering Pines. They have an opening next week for your mother. Small room, but private bath, and within our budget." "My budget?" He meant the fictional budget of a supposedly destitute widow. "That seems awfully rushed," I commented. "I haven't even toured the facility." "They'll arrange a visit tomorrow, but spaces fill quickly, so we'd need to put down a deposit to hold it." He turned to Jessica. "I told her we'd bring a check by in the morning." Jessica looked uncertain. "Shouldn't we discuss this with Mom first? Maybe look at a few more options?" Andrew's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "We've already looked at 3 facilities, darling, and given your mother's health concerns, the garage simply isn't suitable unless you'd prefer she move into the guest suite again." The question was loaded with implication. Jessica glanced at me apologetically. "The deposit makes sense. We can always get it back if you don't like the place, right?" "Of course," Andrew assured her, though I doubted the truth of that statement. I stood, gathering my dignity. "I appreciate your concern for my welfare, Andrew, but I'm not ready to make that decision yet. I'd like to explore all my options." His expression hardened. "Options require resources, Eleanor. Resources you don't have. Jessica and I are trying to be generous here, but our patience and finances have limits." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Andrew frowned, checking his watch again. "Are we expecting someone?" "I'll get it," Jessica said quickly, seeming relieved by the interruption. A moment later, George's booming voice carried from the entryway. "There she is. Jessica, my dear, you're looking more like your mother every day." I suppressed a smile. George had arrived right on cue. By the time he entered the kitchen, he was in full performance mode, the jovial old family friend, oblivious to tension or subtext. "Eleanor," he exclaimed, embracing me, "when you mentioned you were staying with Jessica, I had to stop by. It's been what, 4 years? And Andrew?" He extended his hand, gripping Andrew's firmly. "Good to see you again, son. Still keeping the financial world turning." Andrew's confusion was evident. He clearly didn't remember meeting George at the funeral, where he'd been just another face in the crowd of mourners. "Mr. Thompson." George Thompson, Thomas's old partner. We met at the service, though it was a difficult day for everyone. George clapped him on the shoulder. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I'm in town for a few days on business and wanted to check in on Eleanor." Andrew's discomfort was growing by the second. "Not at all, though we were in the middle of a family discussion about my living arrangements," I supplied. "Andrew and Jessica think I should move to an assisted living facility." George's eyebrows shot up. "Assisted living? At your age, Eleanor, you're more vibrant than half the 60-year-olds I know." "Mom's been sick," Jessica explained. "The garage isn't properly insulated, and with winter coming—" "The garage?" George interrupted, his performance slipping momentarily as genuine outrage broke through. "You're living in the garage, Eleanor?" I nodded. "It's a temporary arrangement." "That won't do at all." George turned to Andrew, his voice hardening slightly. "Surely a man of your means can find better accommodations for your mother-in-law than a garage." Thomas Wilson would be appalled. Andrew bristled at the implied criticism. "We've offered alternatives. Eleanor has been resistant." "Resistant to being shipped off to a nursing home, perhaps," George replied. "But surely there are other options. What about renting her an apartment nearby or converting part of this enormous house into a private space for her?" "We've considered those options," Andrew said stiffly. "They're not financially viable at the moment." George made a show of looking around the expensively renovated kitchen. "Really? Forgive me, but you seem to be doing quite well for yourselves. Custom cabinetry, high-end appliances. Thomas would be impressed by the upgrades." I watched Andrew's expression darken. George was deliberately provoking him, pushing buttons to see how he'd react. So far, the results were revealing. "Our financial situation is private," Andrew said coldly, "and frankly, none of your business." George raised his hands in mock surrender. "You're absolutely right. Forgive an old man's impertinence. I'm just concerned about Eleanor. Thomas and I were partners for 30 years. She's like family to me." Jessica, ever the peacemaker, jumped in. "We're concerned about her too, Mr. Thompson. That's why we're looking at assisted living options. Mom needs proper care, especially with her health issues." George turned to me, his concern appearing genuine. "Health issues? Eleanor, you didn't mention anything serious in your Christmas card." "Respiratory infection," I explained, "from the garage conditions." George's expression darkened. "I see." He seemed to make a decision, pulling out his wallet and extracting a business card. "Well, I'm staying at the Maplewood Inn for the next few days. Eleanor, why don't you join me for dinner tomorrow? We can catch up properly." He handed me the card, then turned to Andrew and Jessica. "You're both welcome too, of course." Andrew opened his mouth, likely to refuse, but Jessica spoke first. "That would be lovely, Mr. Thompson. What time?" 7 o'clock. The hotel restaurant is quite good." "Perfect." Jessica smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll be there." After George left, Andrew rounded on Jessica. "Why did you accept that invitation?" "We have the charity gala tomorrow night." "That's not until 9, Jessica countered. "We can do both. Besides, Mr. Thompson is Dad's old friend. It would be rude to refuse." Andrew's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he turned to me. "Your friend seems quite concerned about your welfare, Eleanor. Perhaps he'd like to contribute to your care expenses since he finds our solutions so inadequate." The suggestion was both insulting and revealing. Andrew viewed relationships purely in transactional terms. If George cared, he should pay. The concept of emotional support without financial strings seemed foreign to him. "George is being polite," I said. "He has his own family to worry about." Andrew snorted. "Convenient. Everyone has opinions about how we should handle things, but no one offers actual help." "I don't need help," I replied evenly. "I need respect. My name is on the deed to the garage you've relegated me to. I built this house with Thomas. I have a right to be treated with dignity in it." "Your name was on the deed," Andrew corrected. "You signed it over, remember? Legally, this property belongs to Jessica now." "Andrew, stop," Jessica said quietly. "Mom knows what she signed." "Does she?" Andrew challenged. "Because she seems to have forgotten that her generous gesture came with practical limitations. We can't afford to maintain this house and finance a separate apartment for her. The assisted living facility is the reasonable compromise." I set down my soup bowl, no longer hungry. "I think I'll return to my garage accommodations now. Thank you for the soup, Jessica." "Mom," Jessica began, but Andrew cut her off. "Let her go. She needs time to consider the Whispering Pines option rationally." I walked out with my head high, refusing to give Andrew the satisfaction of seeing me upset. Back in the garage, I texted George. "Thank you for the interruption. Things are worse than I thought." His reply came immediately. "Agreed. That man is a snake. Dinner tomorrow is set. I've also made contact with Margaret Winters. She's agreed to meet us the day after for progress. If Margaret could provide her account statements, we might have the evidence we need to prove Andrew's financial misdeeds. But first, I needed to survive another night in the garage and prepare for tomorrow's dinner. A dinner that could change everything. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of raised voices again. Through the garage window, I could see Andrew and Jessica on the back patio, engaged in another heated discussion. Andrew was gesturing emphatically while Jessica shook her head. I couldn't hear their words, but the body language was clear. He was pushing for something, and she was resisting. I waited until Andrew's car pulled out of the driveway before making my way to the house. Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee, her expression troubled. "Everything all right?" I asked, pouring myself a cup. She started as if she hadn't heard me enter. "Fine, just discussions about finances." "The house loan again?" Jessica nodded. "Andrew says we need to move quickly. The bank needs paperwork by the end of the week, and you're still not comfortable with it." She looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know what to do, Mom. Andrew says it's crucial for the business, but it's Dad's house. Using it as collateral feels wrong." I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. "Your father built this house to be your security, Jessica, not a bargaining chip in a business transaction." "I know, but Andrew says if we don't get this loan, some of their clients could lose significant portions of their investments. He talks about our responsibility to them, a convenient moral high ground that conveniently ignores the recklessness that had created the situation. Classic manipulation." "If the firm is in that kind of trouble," I suggested gently, "perhaps it's time to bring in outside help. Financial regulators even. They can sometimes arrange protection for clients while restructuring occurs." Jessica said Andrew would never agree to that. "He says any hint of instability would cause a run on the firm. Everyone would withdraw at once and they couldn't cover it." Another red flag. If Reynolds Financial couldn't handle normal client withdrawals, they were already insolvent. "Jessica," I said, taking her hand, "I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be honest with me. Has Andrew ever hurt you? Physically, I mean." Her reaction was immediate, a flash of panic, quickly controlled. "No." "Why would you ask that?" "Because I've seen how tense you get when he's angry. The way you watch his movements, anticipate his moods. It's not healthy, Jess. He's under a lot of stress." The defense was automatic, rehearsed. "Sometimes he raises his voice, but he wouldn't do that." I squeezed her hand. "If that ever changes, if you ever feel unsafe, you'll tell me, right? Promise me." She nodded, though her eyes avoided mine. "I promise, but it's not like that, Mom." "Really?" I wanted to believe her, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Whatever was happening at Reynolds Financial had Andrew on edge, and Jessica was bearing the brunt of his anxiety. The dinner with George tonight couldn't come soon enough. I spent the day preparing, using George's hotel room to shower and change into clothes more suitable for an upscale restaurant. The black pantsuit I chose projected authority and confidence, a far cry from the defeated widow Andrew believed me to be. I styled my silver hair carefully, applied subtle makeup, and added the pearl earrings Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary. George whistled appreciatively when I emerged from the bathroom. "There's the Eleanor Wilson I remember. Andrew won't know what hit him." "That's the idea," I replied, checking my reflection one last time. "Did you bring the documents?" He patted his briefcase. "Everything we need is right here. Are you sure you want to do this in a public place?" "Absolutely. Andrew is too concerned with appearances to make a scene in the hotel restaurant, and having witnesses might work in our favor." We arrived at the restaurant early, securing a corner table with a good view of the entrance. I felt a curious calm settle over me as we waited. After months of playing defense, of being marginalized and dismissed, I was finally taking control of the narrative. Jessica and Andrew arrived precisely at 7. I watched their approach carefully, noting the tension in Jessica's posture and the proprietary way Andrew guided her with a hand at her back. They were dressed formally, Jessica in a navy cocktail dress I'd never seen before, and Andrew in a tailored suit that screamed expensive taste. Andrew spotted us first, his steps faltering momentarily as he took in my transformed appearance. The surprise in his eyes was deeply satisfying. "Eleanor," he managed, regaining his composure, "you look different." "A proper shower works wonders," I replied mildly, rising to embrace Jessica. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Jessica hugged me tightly, whispering, "You look amazing, Mom." George stood, shaking Andrew's hand with practiced bonhomie. "Andrew, good to see you again. Please have a seat. I've taken the liberty of ordering a bottle of Bordeaux, Thomas's favorite." We settled around the table, Andrew clearly unsettled by the shift in dynamics. I was no longer the garage-dwelling burden, but an equal participant in the evening, dressed and groomed as befitted my actual social status. "Mr. Thompson mentioned you worked with Dad's company," Jessica said as the icy wine was poured. "Were you involved in the early days?" George smiled warmly. "From the very beginning, your father and I started with a single truck and more ambition than sense. But Thomas had vision, and your mother had business acumen. Quite the partnership. Mom handled the books." Jessica seemed surprised. "Eleanor did far more than that," George corrected. "She negotiated contracts, managed client relationships, and oversaw the financial projections that guided our expansion. Thomas built the structures, but your mother built the business." Andrew sipped his wine, his expression skeptical. "Interesting. Eleanor never mentioned her executive experience to me." "You never asked," I replied simply. The waiter arrived to take our orders, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. Once he departed, George steered the conversation toward business matters. "Andrew, Eleanor tells me you're preparing for an audit at Reynolds Financial, always a stressful time for any firm." Andrew's grip tightened on his wine glass. "Just routine, nothing to be concerned about." "Of course," George agreed pleasantly, "though in my experience audits tend to get more complicated when there are discrepancies." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Thompson?" "Not implying anything," George assured him. "Just making conversation. The financial industry is heavily regulated for good reason. Client trust is paramount." "Indeed it is," Andrew replied coldly, "which is why we maintain the highest ethical standards at Reynolds Financial." I caught Jessica watching this exchange with growing unease. She could sense the undercurrents even if she didn't understand their source. "Speaking of client trust," I interjected smoothly, "I was thinking about our conversation yesterday, Jessica, about the house loan." Andrew's attention snapped to me. "That's a private family matter, Eleanor." "Is it? It affects me too. That house was my home for 40 years. I built it with Thomas." I turned to Jessica. "Have you asked to see documentation about these investments that Andrew says will mature next quarter? The ones that would repay the loan?" "Mom, this isn't the time," Jessica said. "It's a reasonable question," George commented. "Due diligence is essential in any financial transaction, especially one involving your primary residence." Andrew set down his glass carefully. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, our family finances are none of your business." "Perhaps not," George conceded, "but as Thomas's old friend and Eleanor's current advisor, I feel a certain responsibility." "Advisor?" Andrew repeated, his voice sharp. "What exactly are you advising her on?" George opened his briefcase and removed a manila folder. "Financial matters primarily. Eleanor asked me to review her options given her current accommodations." Andrew's expression darkened. "Eleanor has no options. The house is in Jessica's name, and Eleanor has no other significant assets." "That's where you're wrong," I said quietly. The moment had arrived. "I have options, Andrew. Many of them." I nodded to George, who slid the folder across the table. Jessica, curious despite her discomfort, opened it. Inside were statements for accounts she'd never seen before, accounts totaling over $4 million. Her eyes widened in shock. "Mom, what is this? Where did this money come from?" "Your father and I were always careful planners," I explained. "We never kept all our eggs in one basket. The house was just one asset among many." Andrew snatched the folder, scanning the documents with growing alarm. "This is impossible. You never mentioned these accounts." "You never asked," I repeated. "You assumed I was destitute because it suited your narrative, just as you assumed I was financially illiterate because I'm an older woman." Jessica looked between us, confusion giving way to understanding. "You've had money all this time while living in our garage?" "I wanted to see what would happen," I admitted. "How you and Andrew would treat me when you thought I had nothing to offer. It was educational." Andrew's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "This changes nothing. The house is still in Jessica's name." "True," I acknowledged, "and it can stay that way. I don't want the house back, Jessica. It was always meant to be yours." "Then what do you want?" Andrew demanded. "Respect," I said simply. "A proper living space within the house that Thomas built, and for you to drop this plan to use the house as collateral for your business loans." Andrew laughed harshly. "You think you can dictate terms now because you have a few accounts? This doesn't give you any legal rights to the property." "No, but it does give me options," I countered. "I could rent a lovely apartment nearby. I could even buy a new house in the neighborhood. But before I do that, I'd like to discuss another matter." I gestured to George, who produced a second folder. "What's this?" Andrew asked wearily. "Information about certain discrepancies at Reynolds Financial," George explained. "Specifically, irregularities in accounts belonging to Margaret Winters, Edward Patel, and several other clients." The color drained from Andrew's face. "How did you—" "We have sources," I said. "And tomorrow I have an appointment with Margaret Winters herself. She's eager to review her account statements with a fresh pair of eyes." Jessica looked bewildered. "Andrew, what is he talking about? What discrepancies?" Andrew ignored her, his eyes fixed on me. "This is slander. You have no proof of any wrongdoing." "Not yet," I agreed. "But an SEC investigation would certainly uncover the truth. Unless, of course, we can come to an arrangement." "You're blackmailing me?" Andrew hissed, leaning across the table. "I prefer to call it negotiation," I replied calmly. "Here are my terms. You will create a proper living space for me in the house, with a private entrance and full autonomy. You will not use the house as collateral for any loans, and you will treat Jessica with the respect she deserves as your wife and as Thomas Wilson's daughter." Andrew's jaw clenched. "And if I refuse?" "Then tomorrow I meet with Margaret Winters, the day after with the SEC. I imagine Robert wouldn't be pleased to have regulators combing through the firm's records just before an audit." The waiter arrived with our entree, forcing a temporary ceasefire. Andrew sat rigid in his chair, not touching his food. Jessica looked between us, trying to piece together what was happening. "Mom, are you saying Andrew's firm is doing something illegal?" she finally asked. Before I could answer, Andrew cut in. "Your mother is making baseless accusations because she's bitter about her living situation. There are no discrepancies at Reynolds Financial. Then you have nothing to worry about, George said cheerfully, cutting into his steak. The SEC investigation should clear everything up. Jessica set down her fork. Andrew, just tell me the truth. Is there something wrong with the company? The moment stretched as Andrew calculated his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tense. There have been some irregularities in our reporting. Nothing illegal, just aggressive accounting practices. My father's methods are sometimes unconventional. Unconventional? George repeated. Is that what you call using new client funds to pay returns to existing clients when the actual investments have failed? Jessica gasped. That's a Ponzi scheme. Andrew glared at George. It's not that simple. We've had some investment losses. Yes, but we're working to recover. The loan would give us time to straighten everything out without anyone getting hurt. Except us, Jessica said quietly. If the investments don't recover, we'd lose our home. It won't come to that, Andrew insisted. I have a plan. I'm sure you do, I said. But it won't involve Jessica's house, not anymore. Andrew's expression hardened as he realized he was cornered. Fine, you can have your living space in the house. We'll convert the east wing, separate entrance, private bathroom, everything you want. But the SEC stays out of this, and the house remains untouched by business loans. I added, non-negotiable. After a tense moment, he nodded curtly. Agreed. I looked at Jessica, whose world was visibly crumbling around her. My heart ached for her. The disillusionment, the betrayal. But the truth, however painful, was necessary. Jessica, I said gently, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but you needed to know. Tears welled in her eyes. All this time, the way you treated Mom, the lies about the business. Was anything you told me true, Andrew? Andrew reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Jessica, everything I did was to protect you, to maintain our lifestyle, by defrauding people, by making my mother sleep in a garage while you renovated her house. She stood abruptly. I need some air. As she walked away, Andrew turned to me, his expression venomous. Are you satisfied now? You've ruined everything. No, Andrew, I replied calmly. You did that all on your own. I rose to follow Jessica, leaving George to handle Andrew. Outside, I found my daughter standing by the hotel's ornamental fountain, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. Jess? I called softly. She turned, tears streaming down her face. Did you plan this? Set up this whole dinner just to humiliate him? To humiliate me? No, I said, approaching cautiously. I planned it to protect you, to show you the truth before it was too late, before the house was gone, before the SEC came knocking. You could have told me privately, warned me. Would you have believed me? I asked gently. Or would you have dismissed it as the bitter accusations of your garage-dwelling mother? She flinched at that, acknowledging the truth in my words. I never wanted you in the garage. That was Andrew's idea. He said it was only temporary, just until his parents' visit ended. But then, there was always someone else staying. Always another reason. I know, I assured her. I don't blame you, Jessica. You were manipulated by a master. But I let it happen, she whispered. I watched him treat you like garbage, and I said nothing. Did nothing. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Dad would be so ashamed of me. I drew her into my arms, holding her as she sobbed. Your father would understand. Andrew preyed on your trust, your love. That's not your fault. What happens now? She asked, her voice small against my shoulder. That depends on you, I said, on what you want. Jessica pulled back, wiping her eyes. I don't know what I want anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, it's all been a lie. Not everything, I corrected. I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere, not again. She managed a watery smile. Even after how I treated you. Even then, that's what family is, Jessica. Not conditional, not transactional, just love through the good and the bad. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I need time to think about Andrew, about the business, about everything. You have time, I assured her, and you have options. Just like I do. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. As we stood there by the fountain, I felt a shift in our relationship, a rebalancing. Jessica wasn't just my daughter now. She was a woman facing difficult truths and choices. And I wasn't just her mother. I was Eleanor Wilson, strong in my own right, with resources and resilience that had surprised even me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Andrew's agreement tonight was born of desperation, not sincerity. The issues at Reynolds Financial wouldn't disappear simply because we'd exposed them. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt hope for myself, for Jessica, and for the future of our family, whatever shape it might take. The morning after our confrontation at the restaurant dawned gray and cold. Jessica hadn't returned home with Andrew last night. She'd asked to stay in my room at George's hotel. I'd left her sleeping there, sneaking out early to return to the house and gather some of my belongings. I wasn't planning to spend another night in that garage, regardless of what Andrew might say. I used my key to enter through the back door, moving quietly in case Andrew was still home. The kitchen was empty, pristine as always, but something felt off. A stillness hung in the air, too complete, too careful. I paused, listening. A soft, shuffling sound came from the direction of Thomas's old study, now Andrew's home office. I moved toward it, pushing the door open without knocking. Andrew sat at the desk, surrounded by stacks of papers. A shredder hummed beside him, its basket already overflowing with confetti-like strips. He looked up, startled, then his expression hardened. "Breaking and entering now, Eleanor?" "Hardly breaking when I have a key," I replied, eyeing the documents. "Destroying evidence is a federal crime when you're under investigation." "There is no investigation," he snapped. "Yet." I stepped into the room, noting the open safe behind the bookshelf. Thomas's old gun safe, now apparently repurposed for document storage. Margaret Winters might disagree. Our meeting is in 3 hours. Andrew's hand stilled on the papers. "Cancel it." "Why would I do that? We had an agreement, but clearly you're not honoring your end of it." I gestured to the shredder. "Planning to run, Andrew, or just covering your tracks?" He stood abruptly, his height allowing him to tower over me. "You have no idea what you're meddling with. This goes beyond me, beyond Reynolds Financial." "Explain it to me then," I challenged, refusing to be intimidated. Andrew paced the length of the office, running a hand through his usually immaculate hair. "You think this is just about aggressive accounting? A few misrepresented returns?" He laughed bitterly. "My father has connections. Powerful people who've invested through our firm for decades, people who expect certain returns regardless of market conditions." My blood ran cold. "You're laundering money." I didn't say that, but his non-denial was telling. "What I'm saying is that if Reynolds Financial comes under SEC scrutiny, the fallout won't just affect me or my father. There will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" He stopped pacing, facing me directly. "I'm warning you for Jessica's sake as much as yours. Some of our clients don't take losses well, and they definitely don't appreciate government attention." The implication was clear, and it sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. Andrew was suggesting something far darker lurked behind Reynolds Financial's facade. All the more reason to get Jessica away from this mess. I said, "Away from you." Andrew's expression shifted, a calculating gleam replacing the panic. "And if she doesn't want to leave?" "Jessica loves me, Eleanor, despite what you might think. Despite what happened last night, we have a life together." "A life built on lies," I countered. "On manipulation and deceit, on comfort and security," he corrected. "I've given her everything she wants, this beautiful home, social status, freedom from financial worry. What are you offering her? A shabby apartment? Life as the daughter of a whistleblower?" I refused to be baited. "I'm offering her the truth, something you've never given her." Andrew returned to the desk, shuffling the papers into a neat stack. "Truth is relative, Eleanor, and often less comfortable than a well-crafted narrative." He looked up, his smile cold. "Do you really think Jessica will choose you over me, over the life we've built?" The question struck closer to home than I wanted to admit. Jessica had spent the night upset, confused. But Andrew had spent years cultivating his influence over her, isolating her from friends, making her dependent on his approval. One night of revelations might not be enough to break that hold. "I think she deserves the chance to make that choice with all the facts," I said finally. Andrew nodded as if we were having a reasonable business discussion. "Fair enough. But before you meet with Margaret Winters, consider this. Jessica is still on the deed to this house. She's still my wife. If Reynolds Financial faces legal trouble, our assets could be frozen or seized, including this property." My stomach tightened. He was right. If the SEC investigated Reynolds and found evidence of fraud, Jessica could lose everything. Not because of anything she'd done, but because she was tied to Andrew legally and financially. "You're using her as a human shield," I said, disgusted. "I'm being practical," he replied. "We all want what's best for Jessica. She doesn't deserve to be dragged into a financial scandal or left homeless because of your vendetta against me." "This isn't a vendetta. It's justice for the people you've defrauded." Andrew shrugged. "Justice is a luxury, Eleanor. Security is a necessity. Ask yourself what Jessica needs more right now." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from George. "Jessica's awake, upset, asking for you." I needed to get back to the hotel to make sure my daughter was all right, but leaving Andrew here, destroying evidence. "Think about it," Andrew said, reading my indecision. "I'll be here when you make your decision." I left without another word, troubled by the encounter. Andrew was more dangerous than I'd realized, not just a financial fraudster, but someone with connections to potentially criminal networks. And he was right about one thing. If Reynolds Financial imploded in a scandal, Jessica would be collateral damage. I drove back to the hotel, my mind racing. The ideal outcome would be for Jessica to divorce Andrew before any SEC investigation became public, separating her legally from his financial misdeeds. But divorces took time, and Andrew didn't strike me as someone who would make the process easy. When I arrived at the hotel room, Jessica was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. Dozens of missed calls and texts from Andrew illuminated the screen. "He keeps saying it's all a misunderstanding," she said as I entered. "That his business practices are aggressive but legal, that you're exaggerating because you're bitter about the garage." I sat beside her. "What do you believe?" "I don't know anymore," she set the phone down. "I've never seen the firm's books, never questioned how they generate the returns they promise clients. Andrew always said it was too complicated for me to understand." "A convenient way to avoid scrutiny," I observed. Jessica nodded slowly. "Last night after you went to bed, I called his assistant, Megan. We've become friends over the years. She confirmed some things. Said there have been client complaints that never get documented, that Andrew and Robert have a separate filing system for certain investors, the VIP list Olivia mentioned." "Yes," Megan said. "Some of those clients never come to the office, never meet with anyone but Robert or Andrew. She's processed wire transfers to offshore accounts for them." Jessica looked up, her eyes troubled. "That's not normal, is it, for a legitimate financial advisor?" "No," I said gently. "It's not." She took a shaky breath. "I think I've been willfully blind, Mom, not just about the business, but about everything. The way he treated you, the way he controls our life. I just didn't want to see it." I put my arm around her shoulders. "We see what we want to see, especially when it comes to people we love." "I don't know if I love him anymore," Jessica whispered. "I'm not sure I even know who he is." Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Andrew. This one she opened. "We need to talk. Your mother doesn't understand what she's doing. People will get hurt." Jessica's hand trembled. "Is he threatening you?" "He's trying to manipulate you," I said, though Andrew's warning in the study echoed in my mind, creating fear to regain control. "What should I do?" She looked utterly lost, this daughter of mine who had always been so confident, so certain of her path. "What do you want to do?" I countered. "This is your life, Jessica, your marriage." "I want—" She paused, thinking. "I want space to figure things out. Away from Andrew, away from that house. I need to see clearly without his influence." I squeezed her hand. "Then that's what we'll do. George has offered his cabin in Vermont. It's remote, peaceful. You could stay there while you decide your next steps. What about you? What about the meeting with Margaret Winters? I hesitated. Andrew's warning about powerful clients and consequences weighed on me. If he was telling the truth, pursuing the investigation could put both Jessica and me at risk. But turning a blind eye meant the fraud would continue. More victims like Margaret would lose their savings, and Andrew would face no consequences for his actions. I'll reschedule with Margaret, I decided. George can drive you to the cabin today. I'll tie up some loose ends here and join you tomorrow. Jessica nodded, relief washing over her features. Thank you, Mom, for everything, for not giving up on me even when I let him put you in that garage. Her voice broke. I'm so ashamed. We've all made mistakes, I assured her. What matters is what we do next. After Jessica left with George, I called Margaret Winters and postponed our meeting, citing a family emergency. She was understanding but clearly disappointed. I've been going through my statements like you suggested, she said. The numbers don't add up, Mrs. Wilson, not even close. I know, I replied, and we will get to the bottom of it, I promise. I just need a few days to handle some personal matters first. Of course, my life savings can wait a little longer. The bitter edge in her voice stung, but I had to prioritize Jessica's safety. Next, I called Michael Gartner, an attorney Thomas and I had worked with for decades. I explained the situation, the financial fraud, Andrew's veiled threats, my concerns for Jessica's well-being and financial security. This is serious, Eleanor, Michael said gravely. If Reynolds Financial is involved in money laundering, as you suspect, the potential criminal exposure extends beyond securities fraud. And these powerful clients Andrew mentioned, I don't like the sound of that. Neither do I. What can we do to protect Jessica? First, she needs to separate herself legally from Andrew and the firm. I can start divorce proceedings immediately if she's willing. Second, we need to document everything. Your conversations with Andrew, Jessica's with his assistant, any evidence of threats or intimidation. Third, despite the risks, we should consider going to the authorities, the SEC perhaps. But given what you've described, the FBI might be more appropriate. Financial Crimes Division. They have the resources to handle cases with potential criminal connections. My stomach tightened. The FBI. This had escalated far beyond what I'd initially imagined when I called George to help me out of the garage. Let me speak with Jessica first. I said this should be her decision too. Of course, but Eleanor, be careful. If Andrew suspects you're planning to go to federal authorities, he might become desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. After hanging up, I made one final call to Martha. I need a favor. I told her, could you go to the house and pick up some of my things? I'm staying at the hotel for now, and I don't want to run into Andrew again. Of course, Martha agreed. Is everything all right? You sound worried. It's complicated. I'll explain everything soon. I promise. Just be careful around Andrew if he's there. Don't antagonize him. Martha scoffed. That pompous bully doesn't scare me. I'll get your things and be out before he knows what's happening. I gave her a list of essentials, medications, important documents I'd kept in the garage, and some clothing. She promised to bring everything to the hotel within a couple of hours. While waiting for Martha, I reviewed the notes George and I had compiled on Reynolds Financial. The pattern was clear. Client accounts with inflated returns, unexplained transfers, documentation that mysteriously disappeared. Andrew's admission about powerful people and expected returns only confirmed our suspicions. This wasn't just financial mismanagement, it was systematic fraud, possibly with connections to organized crime. Martha arrived at the hotel just after noon, wheeling a suitcase of my belongings. All clear, she reported. Andrew wasn't home. The place was a mess, though. Papers everywhere, especially in his office. Looks like someone was searching for something. That troubled me. Andrew had been meticulously destroying documents when I left. Had someone else visited the house after me? Did you notice anything else unusual? Martha thought for a moment. There was a car I didn't recognize parked down the street. A black sedan, tinted windows. Might be nothing, but it seemed out of place in your neighborhood. A chill ran down my spine. Thank you for doing this, Martha. It means a lot. "Where's Jessica?" she asked, looking around the hotel room. "She's gone somewhere safe for a few days," I said vaguely. "To clear her head." Martha's expression softened. "Good. That girl needs space away from that man. I never liked him, you know. Too smooth, too practiced." I smiled weakly. "You saw what I didn't want to see. Mothers are blind when it comes to their children's happiness," Martha said kindly. "You wanted to believe Jessica had found someone worthy of her." After Martha left, I unpacked the suitcase, organizing my medications and clothing. At the bottom, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in Thomas's handwriting. I stared at it, confused. This hadn't been on my list of items for Martha to retrieve. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter dated just weeks before Thomas's death, along with a small key. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means you finally stood up for yourself against whoever convinced you to leave our home. Good for you, my love. I always knew you would eventually." Tears sprang to my eyes. Even from beyond the grave, Thomas knew me better than I knew myself. "I've left something for you in our special place. The key enclosed will open it. Use it wisely, and remember that I'm always with you, always proud of the lioness I married. All my love, Thomas." Our special place. I knew immediately what he meant. The hidden compartment Thomas had built into the master bedroom closet, a secret space where we'd kept our most important documents and valuables. If Andrew had discovered it during the renovations, whatever Thomas had left would be gone. But if it remained untouched, I needed to get back to the house one more time. I waited until evening, monitoring the house from Martha's car, which I'd borrowed for the occasion. Andrew's BMW wasn't in the driveway, and the house remained dark as sunset faded into night. At 8 high, I made my move, using my key to enter through the back door once again. The house was silent, the kitchen spotless as always. I moved through the familiar rooms up the stairs to what had once been my bedroom with Thomas. The renovations Andrew had mentioned were evident. The walls were now painted a sterile gray. Our warm, cherry furniture had been replaced with modern pieces in glass and chrome. The walk-in closet, however, appeared structurally unchanged. I went directly to the back panel, running my fingers along the edge until I found the concealed latch. It clicked open, revealing the small compartment behind. Relief washed over me. It was untouched. Thomas's hiding spot had remained undiscovered through the renovations. Inside was a fireproof lockbox. I inserted the key from the envelope, turning carefully. The box opened to reveal a USB drive, another key larger, like a safe deposit box key, and a sealed envelope labeled for Eleanor. Urgent. My hands trembled as I opened this second letter. Eleanor, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I've been monitoring Robert Reynolds and his firm for years, ever since they approached Wilson Construction about a partnership that didn't feel right. What I found disturbed me deeply. The enclosed drive contains documentation of what I believe to be money laundering operations using Reynolds Financial as a front. I've sent copies to trusted contacts in the FBI, but I wanted you to have this as insurance. The safe deposit key opens box number 247 at First National. Inside, you'll find additional documentation, enough to protect you and Jessica if Reynolds ever becomes a threat. Be careful, my love. These are dangerous people. Trust George. He knows everything. I love you always, Thomas. I sat back on my heels, stunned. Thomas had known about Reynolds Financial's criminal activities years ago. He'd been investigating them secretly, even as his health failed. And he'd left me this insurance policy, anticipating a day when I might need protection against them. I pocketed the USB drive, the safe deposit key, and both letters. Whatever was on that drive and in that safe deposit box could be crucial leverage, not just against Andrew, but against the entire criminal operation he was part of. As I closed the hidden compartment and prepared to leave, I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening downstairs. Footsteps moved through the entry hall, too heavy to be Jessica's. Andrew had returned. I froze, listening. The footsteps paused in the living room, then continued toward the stairs. He was coming up quickly. I scanned the room for hiding places or escape routes. The bedroom had a small balcony overlooking the backyard, but jumping from that height could mean serious injury. The bathroom offered limited concealment. The closet where I stood had nowhere to hide except I glanced up at the attic access panel in the closet ceiling. Thomas had installed a pull-down ladder for storage access years ago. If I could reach it without making noise, the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, moving down the hallway toward the master bedroom. I had seconds, not minutes. I stretched upward, fingers just brushing the pull cord for the attic ladder. Too short. I needed something to stand on. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. The handle turned. In desperation, I dragged a storage ottoman from the corner of the closet, positioned it beneath the access panel, and climbed up. My fingers closed around the pull cord just as the bedroom door opened. I tugged the cord, wincing at the soft scraping sound as the ladder descended. The bedroom light flicked on, casting shadows into the closet. I scrambled up the ladder into the attic, pulling it closed behind me just as footsteps entered the closet below. Heart pounding, I lay flat on the attic floor, attempting to control my breathing. Through the thin panel, I could hear Andrew moving around the closet, opening drawers, pushing hangers aside. Was he looking for something specific, or had he somehow sensed my presence? "I know you were here, Eleanor." His voice called startlingly clear through the floor. "Your perfume lingers. Japanese cherry blossom, isn't it? Jessica wears the same scent, like mother, like daughter." I remained perfectly still, barely breathing. "Did you think I wouldn't notice the missing items from the garage? Or that Martha wasn't being watched when she came to collect your things?" His voice hardened. "What did you take from this house, Eleanor? What did Thomas leave behind?" So, he knew about Thomas's secret compartment, or at least suspected something. Had he been searching for it during the renovations, unable to find what Thomas had hidden so carefully? "It doesn't matter," Andrew continued, talking to the empty room as if he could sense me nearby. "Whatever evidence you think you have, it won't be enough. And even if it were, you wouldn't risk Jessica's safety by using it, would you? A mother's love is so predictable." The closet light switched off. Footsteps retreated across the bedroom, then paused. "I'll find Jessica. You know, the cabin in Vermont isn't as secret as you think. George Thompson isn't as careful as he should be. And when I find her, we'll have a long conversation about family loyalty." My blood froze. How did he know about the cabin? Had he been monitoring our phones? Had someone followed George and Jessica? The bedroom door closed and the footsteps descended the stairs. I remained in the attic, counting my heartbeats, waiting to ensure Andrew was truly gone. Only when I heard the distant sound of the front door closing and a car engine starting did I dare to breathe normally again. I needed to warn Jessica and George immediately if Andrew knew where they were. I descended the ladder carefully, checking that the bedroom was empty before making my way downstairs. The house remained silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of having walked into a trap that was still closing around me. Outside, I scanned the street for the black sedan Martha had mentioned, but saw nothing unusual. I hurried to her car, sliding into the driver's seat and locking the doors before reaching for my phone. No signal. I frowned, checking the settings. Full battery, but 0 bars. It had been working fine earlier. A soft tap on the passenger window made me jump. A man in a dark suit stood beside the car, smiling politely. He held up what appeared to be a badge. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his voice muffled through the glass. "FBI, we need to talk." I stared at him, paralyzed with indecision. Was he legitimate or one of the powerful clients Andrew had warned about? The badge looked real, but in the darkness, it was hard to be certain. "Please open the door, Mrs. Wilson. It concerns your daughter's safety." Jessica. Her name shattered my hesitation. I unlocked the passenger door. The man slid into the seat beside me, closing the door and relocking it in one smooth motion. "Thank you. I'm Agent Harris. We've been monitoring Reynolds Financial for some time. How did you know I'd be here?" "We've had the house under surveillance since your late husband contacted us 3 years ago. Thomas Wilson provided key information about Robert Reynolds' operations, but we needed more to build a case." He studied me. I believe you just recovered something from inside. My hand went instinctively to my pocket where the USB drive and keys rested. Thomas left it for me? Agent Harris nodded. Your husband was a brave man. He uncovered the connection between Reynolds Financial and a money laundering operation that spanned several states. Unfortunately, his illness progressed before he could provide us with conclusive evidence. And now you think I have that evidence? We hope so. But more importantly, we need to get you to safety. Andrew Reynolds made several calls after you left the house this morning. One was to a number we've linked to individuals known for resolving problems permanently. A hitman. Andrew had called a hitman. Jessica, I gasped. My daughter is safe, Agent Harris assured me. We intercepted Mr. Thompson and Miss Wilson before they reached the cabin. They're in protective custody now. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by dread. Protective custody? How serious is this, Agent Harris? Serious enough that we need to move you immediately. Reynolds knows you have evidence that could destroy his operation and implicate his criminal associates. You're a loose end they can't afford. I thought of Andrew's warning in the study, his calculated threats at the restaurant, his eerily confident voice as he promised to find Jessica. I'd underestimated him badly, treating him like a common financial fraudster when he was actually part of something much darker. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. You come with me. We get your statement, secure the evidence, and place you in the witness protection program until we've dismantled the entire operation. Witness protection, I echoed. Leave my home, my identity, everything. Agent Harris's expression softened slightly. It won't be forever, Mrs. Wilson, just until we've made arrests and the threat is neutralized. I glanced back at the house, the home Thomas and I had built, the life we'd created, the memories embedded in every wall and floorboard. Andrew hadn't just taken my daughter, my status in the household, my dignity. Now he was taking everything else. No, not taking. I was choosing to sacrifice these things temporarily to protect Jessica, to honor Thomas's final efforts, to see justice done. This wasn't defeat. It was strategic retreat. I need to get something from the hotel first, I said. Documents George and I collected about Reynolds Financial's client accounts. Agent Harris checked his watch. We can send someone to retrieve them. Right now, our priority is getting you to a secure location. As we drove away from the neighborhood, I watched the familiar streets recede in the side mirror. Thomas had known this might happen. He'd prepared for it, left me the tools I needed to protect myself and Jessica when the time came. My brilliant, foresighted husband, planning for contingencies even as he faced his own mortality. You okay, Mrs. Wilson? Agent Harris asked, noting my silence. Eleanor, I corrected. And yes, I'm okay. I've survived worse than Andrew Reynolds. Your husband mentioned you were formidable, he said with a slight smile. Said you were the backbone of everything he built. He exaggerated, I replied, though the compliment warmed me. But I am resilient. As we merged onto the highway, heading toward an uncertain future, I thought of Jessica safely in protective custody, of George, who had come when I called, no questions asked, of Thomas, whose love and foresight protected me even now. I wasn't alone in this fight. I never had been. Andrew had underestimated me from the beginning, seeing only an aging widow, a garage-dwelling burden, a woman past her prime and usefulness. His blindness had been his weakness, and now it would be his downfall. Eleanor Wilson might be entering witness protection tonight, leaving behind the home she had built and the life she had known. But she was taking with her something Andrew could never touch or tarnish. Her dignity, her strength, and the evidence that would ensure justice was finally served. 18 months can change everything. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror hardly resembled Eleanor Wilson anymore. My silver hair was now chestnut brown, cut in a stylish bob instead of my traditional longer style. I'd lost weight. Stress will do that to you, and gained muscle from the self-defense classes the FBI had recommended. Even my wardrobe had transformed, trading conservative classics for more contemporary pieces that helped maintain my cover identity. Diana Phillips. That's who I'd been since that night Agent Harris had whisked me away from Maplewood. Diana Phillips, retired library administrator from Oregon, now living quietly in a southwestern town whose name I'd never even heard before the relocation. The apartment was pleasant enough. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony overlooking desert landscaping, and a community pool that I never used. But it wasn't home. It wasn't the house Thomas and I had built together, the rooms that held decades of memories, the garden where I'd taught Jessica to plant sunflower seeds when she was 5. My phone chimed, a secure line used only for communications with my FBI contacts. "The trial begins Monday," Agent Harris said when I answered. "Reynolds's financials and entire operation have been dismantled. Robert Reynolds took a plea deal. He's cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence." "And Andrew?" I asked, the name still bitter on my tongue after all this time. "Still maintaining his innocence? Claims he was unaware of any illegal activities, that his father kept him in the dark about the money laundering connections." I snorted. "Of course he does. It won't work," Harris assured me. "We have testimony from multiple associates, paper trails, electronic records, and most damaging, we have the evidence your husband collected, combined with your testimony and Jessica's." Jessica. My heart ached at the mention of her name. For security reasons, we'd been kept separate during the investigation and pre-trial preparations, communicating only through heavily monitored channels. I knew she was safe, knew she'd divorced Andrew months ago, but the mother in me needed to see her face, to hold her, and make sure she was truly okay. "When can I see her?" I asked the question I'd been asking for 18 months. This time, Harris's answer was different. "Monday, you'll both be brought to the courthouse under protection. After you testify, we'll reevaluate the threat level. But if all goes as expected, your witness protection restrictions could be lifted within weeks." Weeks. After a year and a half of exile, of a life paused and held in suspended animation, I could finally reclaim myself. Eleanor Wilson could re-emerge from the shadow of Diana Phillips. "What about the house?" I asked. It was another frequent question of mine, one that usually received vague answers about asset freezes and legal complications. "Released from federal hold last month," Harris replied. "It's yours again, or rather Jessica's, since the deed is still in her name. But given the circumstances, I imagine she'd be happy to sign it back to you." Tears pricked at my eyes. "And George? Martha? Are they still both fine?" "Mr. Thompson has been a valuable consultant throughout our investigation. Ms. Daniels has maintained your garden, apparently. Says she couldn't bear to see Thomas's rose bushes wither." I wiped away a tear, overwhelmed with gratitude for these faithful friends who had carried on in my absence, keeping watch over the pieces of my life I'd been forced to abandon. "Thank you, Agent Harris, for everything." "Just doing my job, Eleanor." His voice softened slightly. "Though I'll admit your case has been memorable. Not many witnesses stay so composed during such a prolonged process." I smiled. I had good motivation. Seeing Andrew Reynolds face justice is worth every inconvenience. After hanging up, I walked to the balcony, staring out at the unfamiliar landscape. The desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink that still seemed alien to me after a lifetime in Connecticut's lush greenery. Beautiful, but not mine. Never mine. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The federal courthouse was imposing, all stone and authority, designed to make ordinary citizens feel small in the face of the law. I sat in the back of an unmarked sedan, flanked by 2 agents watching the media gathered on the steps. The Reynolds financial scandal had exploded into national news once the FBI had moved against Robert and Andrew. The scope of their crimes, securities fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and connections to organized crime figures, had captivated the public's imagination. "Ready, Mrs. Wilson?" Agent Harris asked from the front seat. I smoothed my navy blue dress, chosen carefully for this moment. Professional, but not severe. As ready as I'll ever be. They escorted me through a side entrance, bypassing the cameras and reporters, through secure corridors and checkpoints, never lingering, always moving with purpose. Finally, we reached a private waiting room where witnesses were being sequestered before testimony, and there she was. Mom. Jessica flew across the room, nearly knocking me over with the force of her embrace. I held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the solidity of her presence after so many months of separation. "Let me look at you," I said, stepping back to study her face. She looked older, more mature than the woman I'd left behind. There was a gravity to her expressions now, a stillness that spoke of hard lessons learned. But her eyes, Thomas's eyes, were clear and direct without the haunted quality they'd held during those final days with Andrew. "You look different," she said, taking in my transformed appearance. "The hair is temporary," I assured her. "Another few weeks and I can go back to being a proud silver fox." She smiled, though tears shimmered in her eyes. "I've missed you so much, Mom. The check-ins with the agents weren't enough. I had so much I wanted to say to apologize for—" "None of that," I interrupted gently. "We were both manipulated by a master. What matters is that we're here now together, and Andrew is finally facing consequences." We sat side by side, hands clasped, as an assistant district attorney briefed us on what to expect during testimony. Jessica would go first, establishing Andrew's controlling behavior and financial deceptions in their personal life. I would follow, detailing my discoveries about Reynolds Financial's client fraud and the evidence Thomas had uncovered. "Remember," the ADA emphasized, "stick to what you personally witnessed or experienced. No speculation or hearsay. Andrew's defense will try to paint you both as vindictive, emotional women seeking revenge for personal slights." "Convenient," I remarked dryly. "When we trusted him, we were naive and easily manipulated. Now that we're testifying against him, we're calculating and vindictive." The ADA smiled grimly. "Welcome to the justice system, Mrs. Wilson. But don't worry, the paper trail doesn't lie, and we have mountains of it." When they called Jessica to testify, I squeezed her hand one last time. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." I watched from the waiting room's video feed as my daughter took the stand, swore her oath, and faced the courtroom. Andrew sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed as always, his expression a careful mask of injured innocence. The sight of him still made my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain calm, to focus on Jessica's testimony. She was magnificent, clear, composed, specific in her recollections. She detailed how Andrew had isolated her from friends, controlled their finances, and reacted with escalating anger when challenged. She described discovering client complaints that had been hidden, overhearing conversations about special handling for certain investors, and witnessing document destruction before audits. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his approach was exactly as predicted, painting Jessica as a spoiled wife who turned against her husband when he insisted on financial responsibility. "Mrs. Reynolds Wilson," Jessica corrected firmly. "I've resumed my maiden name." The attorney barely paused. "Ms. Wilson, isn't it true that the tensions in your marriage began when your husband expressed concerns about your spending habits?" Jessica didn't flinch. "No, we had no financial tensions. Andrew controlled all our accounts and made all spending decisions. My allowance was deposited monthly and monitored carefully." "And that monitoring upset you?" "Being treated like a child upset me," Jessica replied calmly. "Discovering my husband was engaging in financial fraud upset me. Watching him relegate my mother to a garage while renovating the home she built upset me." The defense attorney switched tactics, trying to suggest Jessica had been complicit in any financial irregularities given her role as Andrew's wife. She deflected each insinuation skillfully, neither defensive nor aggressive, simply matter of fact. By the time Jessica stepped down, the defense attorney looked frustrated, and Andrew's confident facade had developed cracks. I felt a surge of pride for my daughter and a renewed determination to be equally effective in my own testimony. When my turn came, I walked into the courtroom with my head high. Andrew's eyes narrowed as he took in my transformed appearance, a flash of genuine surprise breaking through his controlled expression. Good. Let him be off balance. I recounted finding myself relegated to the garage, discovering Andrew's affair with his colleague, and uncovering the financial irregularities at Reynolds Financial. I detailed the meeting with Olivia Chen, the concerns about Margaret Winter's account, and ultimately finding Thomas's hidden evidence about the firm's criminal connections. "Mrs. Wilson," the prosecutor asked, What did your late husband's documentation reveal about Reynolds Financial? Thomas had been tracking unusual patterns at the firm for years, I explained. Large cash deposits that were immediately distributed to certain client accounts, returns that consistently outperformed the market regardless of economic conditions, and most damning, connections between several of Reynolds' VIP clients and known organized crime figures. Objection. Andrew's attorney was on his feet. Speculation and hearsay. Your Honor, Mrs. Wilson is simply describing the contents of documents already entered into evidence, the prosecutor countered. The judge nodded. Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Wilson. I described finding the USB drive and safe deposit key, explained the documentation Thomas had compiled, and detailed Andrew's threats about powerful people who wouldn't appreciate government attention. During cross-examination, Andrew's attorney tried the same approach he'd used with Jessica, suggesting I was motivated by bitterness over my living arrangements, jealousy of my daughter's marriage, and resentment of my diminished status in the household. Isn't it true, Mrs. Wilson, that you were upset about no longer being the lady of the house? He asked, his tone condescending. I was upset about being forced to sleep in an unheated garage while perfectly good bedrooms sat empty, I corrected. I was upset about witnessing my son-in-law defraud vulnerable clients. I was upset about discovering the man who married my daughter was connected to organized crime. These seem like reasonable concerns. Wouldn't you agree? A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Andrew's attorney flushed, adjusting his approach. You've admitted to entering Mr. Reynolds' home office without permission and accessing confidential business documents. Isn't that illegal entry and theft? It was my home, I said simply. My name was on the deed when the house was built. The garage where I was forced to live was part of that property, and the documents I accessed were left to me by my late husband, hidden in a compartment he built specifically for our use. Nothing was stolen. It was already mine. By the time I finished testifying, Andrew's composed facade had completely crumbled. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated. I allowed myself a small smile as I stepped down from the witness stand. Thomas would have been proud. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness confirmed the pattern of fraud and deception at Reynolds Financial. Former employees described the pressure to manipulate client returns, the separate accounting system for VIP clients, and the document destruction before audits. Financial experts detailed how the firm had operated essentially as a Ponzi scheme, using new client funds to pay returns to existing clients while skimming millions for personal use. Most damaging were the testimonies from Robert Reynolds' criminal associates who had flipped on the family in exchange for reduced sentences. They described how Reynolds Financial had laundered money from drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and labor racketeering operations across 3 states. Through it all, Andrew maintained his innocence, insisting he'd been unaware of his father's criminal connections. But the evidence told a different story. Phone records, email communications, offshore accounts in Andrew's name filled with unexplained cash deposits. On the final day of the trial, I sat beside Jessica in the gallery, our hands clasped tightly as we awaited the verdict. George Thompson sat on my other side, a solid, reassuring presence. Martha had come too, along with several of the defrauded clients, including Margaret Winters. When the jury foreman stood, the courtroom fell silent. On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant, Andrew Reynolds, guilty. Jessica's hand tightened around mine. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. My eyes fixed on Andrew's back, watching his shoulders slump incrementally with each guilty verdict. On the count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. By the time all 15 counts had been read, Andrew's carefully crafted facade had completely collapsed. When he turned to look back at Jessica one last time before being led away, his expression wasn't of a polished financial advisor or calculating criminal. It was simply that of a man who had lost everything. Court is adjourned, the judge announced, bringing down his gavel with a definitive crack. Outside the courthouse, standing on the same steps where reporters had gathered for weeks, I breathed deeply of the Connecticut air. After 18 months in witness protection, it felt like coming back to life. What now? Jessica asked. linking her arm through mine as we walked toward George's waiting car. "Now we go home," I said simply. Home? The word held such power after so long away, and yet, as we drove through familiar neighborhoods toward the house Thomas had built, I wondered what home would mean now. The physical structure remained, but everything else had changed. Jessica, me, our relationship, our understanding of the world and the people in it. The house came into view as we rounded the corner, Thomas's colonial with its distinctive roofline and wraparound porch. Martha had indeed kept up the garden. Thomas's prized roses were blooming along the front walk, a riot of red and pink against the white siding. "I had the garage demolished," Jessica said as we pulled into the driveway. "Started the renovations last month once the property was released from federal hold. Where the detached garage had once stood is now the foundation for a new structure, an addition to the main house. From the looks of it, it has large windows and a separate entrance." "What is it?" I asked, stepping out of the car. Jessica smiled. "Your new living space, completely separate from the main house, but connected by a breezeway. Your own kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, independence with proximity. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Tears filled my eyes as I embraced my daughter. "It's perfect," I whispered. "I should have done this 2 years ago," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. "Instead of letting him—" "No more looking back," I interrupted gently. "We've both learned our lessons. Now we move forward." As we walked toward the house, our house, I felt Thomas's presence around me in the solid beams he'd selected, the careful craftsmanship he'd insisted upon, the home he'd built to last generations. He'd known somehow that we would need this foundation to weather the storms that came. Inside, Martha had prepared a welcome home dinner. The dining room table, Thomas's cherished cherry wood that had somehow survived Andrew's renovations, was set for 4. George uncorked a bottle of champagne, raising a toast to justice served and new beginnings. Later, as sunset painted the living room in golden hues, I stood at the window watching the changing light play across the lawn, where Jessica had learned to walk, where Thomas and I had hosted summer barbecues, where a family had grown and changed and endured. "I signed the deed back to you this morning," Jessica said, joining me at the window. "The house is yours again." I shook my head. "No, it should be ours. Both our names on the deed. Equal partners. No more imbalance. No more power dynamics." Jessica smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Deal." As darkness fell, I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment, from the garage to witness protection, to the courtroom, and finally back home. Andrew had thought he could discard me, reduce me to nothing more than an inconvenient old woman to be tucked away and forgotten. He'd underestimated me. Underestimated the strength that comes from building a life, a home, a family with your own hands. Underestimated the resilience that develops through decades of weathering life's challenges. Underestimated the power of a mother determined to protect her child, even from dangers the child cannot see. Most of all, he'd underestimated what can happen when that mother makes one phone call, setting in motion events that would ultimately bring down an entire criminal enterprise. I was Eleanor Wilson, 69 years old, widow of Thomas Wilson, mother of Jessica, builder of homes and lives. I had survived being relegated to a garage, separated from my daughter, and stripped of my identity. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and finally triumphant. As Martha and George prepared to leave for the evening, Jessica touched my arm. "Stay here tonight. Your suite isn't quite finished, but your old bedroom is ready. I'd feel better knowing you were here." "Of course," I said, squeezing her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, not anymore." Later, lying in the bedroom where Thomas and I had spent so many years, I felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. Andrew was gone, facing decades in federal prison. The house was ours again, being reshaped to reflect our new understanding of family and boundaries. Jessica and I were healing, our relationship stronger for having been tested. I had given my daughter our family home, and her husband had made me sleep in the garage. But in the end, one phone call had changed everything, restored justice, reclaimed our legacy, and brought me home at last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.